So I want to ask you first about the shack, but then after that, I want to go into issues, for example, of say, for example, child support, no-fault divorce. But first, tell me, you mentioned the school health advisory council.
Yes.
How would a person can anybody join this? Can anybody run for this? I mean, I'm a grandfather right now, and the stuff that I'm fighting for because I don't want this for my grandchildren.
Right. Well, and there's an organization called Take Back the Shack.
Okay.
That was founded by our friend Debbie Simmons.
Okay.
And she has a lot of information. She's the expert on that one. So I would defer to her on that she has found out a lot of information about that. So you can apply to be on the shack, but then someone has to decide if you would be a good person for it or not.
Do you have to subscribe to a certain ideology, and can you be a person?
That's a good question, and I would defer that to Debbie.
Okay. Okay. Well, Debbie will be talking with you sometime soon.
Yes, Debbie, you're next.
So, going back to this issue about the sex education film, is that what it was that you said?
Yes.
That
the
was
Time of Your Life series.
The Time of Your Life series. That by the year 2000, fathers would not be necessary.
Yes.
So when this, I'm going to get to the fatherless thing in just a moment here. But the issue of no-fault divorce.
Right.
I mentioned briefly that we are fighting against the issue of no-fault divorce. We plan to, we're going to be starting an organization soon here.
Right.
I think this is a big issue that people are not, we've become so accepting of divorce, and even judges will say to you, well, we try to do a just and equitable decision, but on what basis?
Right.
And on what basis are you kicking a father or a mother out of the house or out of the family? And are you even giving any consideration at all to the desires and wishes of the children who say, I want my parents together?
Right.
But so tell me a little bit more about the sex education and perhaps how it provided maybe a basis for or foundation for no-fault divorce, or how it has helped to further that ideology?
Well, of course, because sex education is elevating pleasure and pleasure outside of marriage. Prior to sex education, it was understood that you didn't have sex until you got married.
Right.
Because the natural consequence, because again, birth control wasn't legal back then.
Right.
So one of the natural consequences is if you get together outside of marriage, then a baby would ensue. So that was a huge deterrent. So once Kinsey came in and said, no, everybody should enjoy pleasure, there shouldn't be any restrictions. So once that was put into play, then the possibility, as we see today, the outcome is people aren't getting married at all. And I know my husband was a family life pastor, and we're finding that a majority of the young couples that were coming to get married in the church were living together.
Right.
So that is very common. And by the way, you would be put in jail if you were living together.
Right.
We have pre-Kinsey law and post-Kinsey law because it was considered open and notorious cohabitation.
Right.
It was considered a threat to the family. So,
and by extension, then not just a threat to the family, but a threat to society.
Exactly.
Nobody talks about
the cost.
The cost to society.
Yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with the study that was done by I forget his name right now, Mr. Scafidi, Edward Scafidi, I think his name is.
Okay.
Economist out of Georgetown, anyway, I don't remember all of the particular details. But in 2008, he talked about the taxpayer cost of divorce and unwed childbearing. He came up to the conclusion at the time, and he was, I don't know, I can't criticize, I don't know how to look at all of his research, but he said, conservatively speaking, divorce and unwed childbearing are costing taxpayers at least $112 billion a year, and it may be more like 165. And if you factor in inflation, maybe 200 million, but I mean, basically what you have is the cost of a Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Harvey, whatever it is, every single year that it's costing the taxpayers. But because it's spread out all over our country, we don't see the actual impact of it.
Right.
So regarding the sex education and the fathers would no longer be necessary. One of the things that we've talked about a lot in Texas, and I'm speaking about Texas because this is where I live right now.
Right.
And Texas, says that it's a very pro-family, but I've found it to be very anti-family in a number of ways. And I'm going to say this. Number one, they allow divorce for any reason, for no reason. The defendant never has an ability to defend himself. Or I should say, we have to say the respondent. The respondent can never actually win a lawsuit. And that's so easy to prove because over the last 10 years, I was actually with an attorney. And I said, over the last 10 years, can you give me an example or 3 examples of some instance that the judge denied the divorce? And she said, well, there was a case. And I said, when? And she's like, well, back in 1992. So this was, it was over 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago, that she's referring to a single case.
Right.
So the person who is divorced forcefully against his or her will, the unilateral divorce, always loses. But then they try to make a just settlement. And what happens is, at the same time, now the Attorney General's office, and this is done by the legislator here, says, we need to make sure that our children are taken care of. Well, number one, you've already abused the children. The sex education is the abuse of children. And now you're going to take a father or a mother out of the home. The children needs both parents to live together. And to remove that protection for the child unnecessarily is abuse. And I would say also that the judges are guilty of abuse. And the other thing is, our Texas Family Code does not even say the judge has to, the judge may, but the judge always does, 100% of the time, without exception. So I look at this stuff here, and you're talking about the sex education, removing a father from a home, but then what happens is that somebody needs to be punished. They call it no-fault divorce, but somebody needs to be punished. And what I mean by that is that one person will become a visitor to the child's life. And it's going to be one of the parents that will be punished, but even more so, every single child will be punished. And somehow we're supposed to be okay with that. And so to me, when we talk about the issue of sex education and the breakdown of the family, and now we have a problem that has been created by our government, and now the government's going to try to solve it in a way that they think is right, which is just exacerbating the problem, and they're ignoring the root issue. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, and again, it goes back to the elephant in the room that we haven't heard yet at this conference, which is the effects of pornography. Because I have friends who have one initiated a divorce, but that was due to the fact that her husband was heavily involved in pornography and was sexually abusing her. So we have the other side of that coin too. So I think, and that's something that we need to address heavily in the church, is the viewing of that and the destruction of the family.
So I was at a conference not too long ago when one of the speakers said that, and here's what he said. I'm not going to say, I'm just going to put it out here for you to comment on. But he said that studies had shown that if people view a little bit of pornography, it doesn't really have a big effect one way or another. And I mean, I think what he was trying to say, and I'm not sure that part of seeing pornography may be part of growing up in a sense. It's, I'm not saying that it's right. I'm just saying, can you comment on that?
Well, science shows that if we are exposed to graphic, sexual, or violent content, our brain literally grows new cells to store that information. If I ask you, what movie did you view when you were 11 years old, and one of those happened to be pornography, that would probably be the one that's going to come to your mind versus some other general PG or G-rated film. So we do know that. Can it be reversed? Absolutely. I asked, I had a very good friend who trained me, and part of this information that I'm sharing with you, Colonel Ron Ray, who was the former assistant to the Secretary of Defense under the Reagan administration. And he had talked about, he had been exposed to pornography. And as a Christian, what's the answer, or what's the solution for that? And he said to bathe your mind in Scripture. So repenting of it, turning from it, and bathing your mind in Scripture was one of the good answers. So yes, I mean, and for our children, what do we teach them? But of course, we're teaching them modesty as they're growing up, but we're also...
Well, we should be teaching them.
We should be teaching them. And I talk about that in this book. But the other thing is, like with my son, I have 3 sons and a daughter, and with the boys talking about Proverbs, and with my daughter, Proverbs 6 and 7, the seductive woman and the dumb guy, and that's what pornography is, and that ultimately led to the death of that man. And when I talk to teenagers, I talk about pornography and the effects on the brain. It's not that God doesn't want you to look at pornography because He's a God of no fun, but rather He's warned that if you look lustfully, it's as if you've committed adultery, and that can be the death of a marriage because of that.